Hello and welcome to VistaTalks, interesting discussions with interesting people from all around the world. I'm your host for today, Simon Hodgkins, and I'm happy to introduce you to Patrick Shields. Patrick is an experienced executive and a PhD researcher in artificial intelligence at Munster Technological University. Patrick, you're very welcome to VistaTalks.
Thank you, Simon. Great to be here.
Very good. Well, thanks very much for being on the show. Let's begin with your current, maybe PhD journey. You're researching, if I'm right, how businesses actually adopt AI. So, what inspired you to pursue that research in particular? And why is this important area such a hot topic in the business landscape from your perspective, Patrick?
Good question. And I'm asked it a lot because the area of artificial intelligence is so broad. But as you say, I'm looking specifically at how businesses adopt AI, especially SMEs, and kind of how that came about. The university which I'm attending, you mentioned, actually, I graduated from this university way back in 2004 with a business course. I ended up coming back during COVID, which was around 2020 to 2022, went into a strategy master's, which brought me out of my comfort zone. But I've always been passionate about technology and innovation and computers. So I kind of wanted to broaden my horizons. And having completed that master's, the opportunity for this PhD arose. And I'm currently doing the PhD full time. It's a scholarship and it's under the TU Rise program. So it's funded by the European Union and the government of Ireland, who are looking specifically at the area of AI adoption because AI is set to add upwards of 150 to 250 billion to the economy in Ireland by the year 2030. Now, where do I get those numbers? So that's straight out of the AI strategy that the government of Ireland established going back a few years now, around 2021. And something that really kind of caught my eye was at the back end of last year, around this time last year, that AI strategy was updated. And what was included in that was a section about SMEs. And what the government of Ireland are looking to roll out is basically an awareness campaign for SMEs about the benefits of AI and all of the supports that are available to SMEs. Now, why is that important and why did the strategy change? Well, there were findings that came out this year around March, and these were findings from the Trinity Business School in association with Microsoft Ireland, talking about how SMEs are lagging behind multinationals by about 30%, that just 10% of SMEs have an AI strategy, which to me probably means they don't have any AI policies. 4 in 5 business leaders understand that AI is being used in their organization without any guardrails whatsoever. And some of these statistics were also part of KPMG and PwC industry reports that I've been following. So, sitting down with my supervisors here, I have 2 fantastic supervisors, Dr. Angela Wright and Dr. Breda O'Dwyer at Munster Technological University. And we really want to look at the management space of this and the leadership space to see what's happening with SMEs. They're falling behind in adoption. It kind of stands to reason that what may be working in multinationals may not necessarily work in SMEs. So can we look at this whole space, and is this a topic that is going to kind of stay relevant over the full 4-year PhD and beyond in a space that's moving so fast? And I feel that it really is, because I think the unique characteristics of SMEs are not going to change overnight. They're informal businesses compared to multinationals a lot of the time. A lot of informal decision making, maybe not so much red tape. We talk about water cooler meetings where, a lot of decisions are done over conversation rather than going through layers of bureaucracy like many multinational corporations might be. And bearing in mind that fluidity and adaptiveness, which is a strength of SMEs, it's also a very different working approach. So I think given that SMEs comprise over 99% of all businesses in Ireland and 2/3 of the workforce, I can see why the government updated their strategy, because if they're saying it's going to add all of this to the economy, how is that going to be realized if all of these businesses are left behind? So that's the reason kind of I'm looking at this space.
Yeah, thanks for the overview and explaining that positioning because I think Ireland is not unique. A lot of countries are struggling with this in their own areas, and obviously some of the very large companies, are either involved in the AI growth, they're driving it with their tools and platforms, or they're involved in the infrastructure, or they're sitting on a giant amount of data which they're being able to utilize. But then when you come down a tier and you look at sort of the corporates or the mid-market type companies and then the small operators, how are they benefiting from it? Because they have a habit of becoming the large companies of tomorrow. So I think it's a fascinating area. And I know your work, it's going beyond just the technical aspects of AI, right? So exploring the human, the strategic, and importantly, you sort of touched on it there, the organizational dynamics. So these things typically don't happen overnight, I know. But any insights there that sort of really enables or really hinders AI adoption in companies today, Patrick?
Yeah, exactly, Simon. As you mentioned, I think on the technical side, SMEs are going to catch up more and more. Like you say, SMEs become large organizations. Costs are coming down for tools, experimentation is happening. It doesn't seem to be the technical, therefore, that's holding it back so much, as far as maybe the organizational and behavioral dynamics at play. And I think, I've had the opportunity to meet lots and lots of businesses now because I'm also a director on the Chamber of Commerce board in Dungarvan and West Waterford in the southeast region of Ireland. So I've met a lot of businesses one to one from every different type of industry and sector, and obviously through my research around the country. And I can see what really hinders it probably is a lack of clarity. Um, there's a lot of kind of discussion around employee fears about this being incorporated and, will this result in job displacement? How is it going to impact me? And I'm seeing employers in the SME kind of area putting it a little bit on the back burner to say, I'm going to start my AI journey later. Anyway, the technology is still advancing. Let's wait and see what happens next. But the reality is that doesn't really work because number one, AI is here, just like innovation that came before it, like electricity or the internet. It's actually here. It's part of our daily lives. Our employees are using it. And that's the whole thing around shadow AI use happening where our employees have ChatGPT, they're using it. And, just to give three quick examples of where this can go wrong, just meeting people in industry, fellow students that are working in industry. You hear about meetings like this being recorded with chatbots taking minutes and people forgetting that there's a chatbot and people staying on the meeting and, salaries being discussed of employees and it going out in minutes. And then, you hear of disciplinary letters forged on ChatGPT and the employee receiving the letter says this looks very much like ChatGPT and questions have my information and allegations being shared with it with a chatbot and gone to a database somewhere. Or another business I met where an accounts assistant ended up sharing profit and loss with a large language model like ChatGPT, etc. And that identifies that business. And SMEs, I've always tended to work for kind of SMEs, family-owned businesses, independent businesses, and they're private, right? They're private about their information. They're private about their accounts. You may go up several layers of management as an employee yourself and still not have access to all of the information because maybe the owners are living in the community. This is their personal business, and absolutely right. But now potentially that stuff could be shared with a large language model, go off to a database somewhere. How do you know it's not learning from your information? How do you know a competitor doesn't have access to that at some date in the future? So all the issues around that. So I think what's hindering SMEs is they're saying, well, we won't start that journey yet. Our employees have issues around it. But actually, what's fostering adoption is the clarity piece. It's the very opposite of that of saying, no, let's accept that it's here. Let's ensure that we have an awareness of a leadership team that it is here. And we need kind of guardrails around this. Like statistic I mentioned earlier, about 4 out of 5 leaders in SMEs know that it's being used in their organization, and they have to admit that they have no policy or guardrails around it. So, like working in hospitality over the years, like I did in Ireland and overseas, I seen a lot of resistance in different forms. My career was established through the Great Recession that we went through, the global downturn between '07 and about 2012, 2013. And hotels were changing hands and there was a lot of change, and this made employees, rightly so, quite uncomfortable. And the only thing that kind of supports management and leadership in getting around resistance and fear is communication, clarity. It's when you stop communicating is when those fears arise and those anxieties arise, and they manifest themselves in different ways that are negative, you know. And what I find is teams will fill the vacuum where that communication doesn't exist. So I think as leaders and SMEs, we have to get ahead of that and say, this is what we're doing. Like one quick example I had was a fellow student I was speaking to who works in a tech firm somewhere in Munster. He said, they were just working one day, and all of a sudden, this chatbot appeared in their meeting that took all the minutes. And I said, "Oh," I said, "was it good?" And he said, "Well, it took all the minutes and it sent them out, which was great, but it didn't identify who was speaking." And so I think there's some work to be done on this. And I said, "Oh, is it a pilot scheme that's being introduced?" And he said, "I'm not really sure. I don't know if it's here to stay or not." He said, "But I don't think it'll stick around." And then I said, "Oh, you weren't aware that it was coming?" And he said, "No." And I said, "All right." And I said, do you mind if I ask it, does your organization have a wider AI strategy at all, even a simple document? And he said, "Not that I'm aware of." And I said, "Okay." And I said, "Have you seen a policy? Have you signed off on a policy?" And he said, "No." And I'm thinking, wow, like in our SMEs, we have policies around everything. All of our handbooks are digital now. We update our handbooks with the new smoking area policy, with the new staff entrance policy, with the new uniform policy. And we're constantly updating this. And we don't have an AI policy, even though these tools are in the pockets of our employees and information could be potentially shared about our business in all kinds of ways. Or we're dropping tools into our business and not communicating with our team. And my last question to that student was, how does this make you feel? And he said, it made us feel very anxious and it made us kind of wary, and we don't know what else is coming down the track and how far is our business going with AI. So he had no clarity. So I think clarity and communication are key. And that's why I say it's probably the behavioral and organizational dynamics we have to consider, not just the tech in this space, you know?
No, excellent points. I couldn't agree more. And it is, I mean, the irony is we're talking about the latest technology and AI changing the world, and yet ultimately the sort of things that are potentially holding us back are all human related, and it's clarity and it's communication and it's trust and all those good things. And interestingly, you mentioned the term uh, shadow AI, but and businesses that are sort of holding back, it's like, well, it's happening in your business anyway. I remember talking to DC Callahan, or you may know, he's a VC, an AI VC now at Sure Valley Ventures, very well respected journalist as well, and writes some really good stuff in the tech sector. And I was talking to him recently at the Google headquarters in Dublin at an event that he was speaking at. And he was really discussing this topic of shadow AI and how, businesses are sort of fooling themselves if they think it's okay to just hold back here because the employees are streets ahead of them. And you're kind of touching on that there, which is interesting. And I want to come back to the human aspect if I can, Patrick, because I know in your career you've led high performing teams, you've been involved in the hospitality sector, for example. And I know you're advising across industries now, but you must see, or how do you see, I suppose, leadership styles having to evolve then to meet these demands, this digital transformation that we're all going through, particularly with things like AI, because it seems like there's a bit of a leadership change required here. Am I right or am I wrong, Patrick? What do you think?
100%. And I think it's such an important point that we have to acknowledge, you know, we're kind of moving from the command and direct leadership more into a stewardship phase where there's ambiguity here and leaders in these SMEs don't have all the answers. So we need to really think about how we're operating. Like, as you mentioned, I was fortunate in the luxury hospitality space. Prior to coming into this PhD, I was part of a group that had three Michelin stars, one Michelin key. So we were really operating probably at the higher end of performance and all of the time having to hit a certain level because you could be inspected multiple times a year, you know, and you had to maintain those standards. And I think it'll continue to be a case that we maintain standards, But I think as leaders, we will have to put the guardrails in place, the policies, and then empower our teams now that they have those guardrails to go and run with it. And we'll need to trust them with that. But as you say, what's happening at the moment is there's this bottom up happening where the employees are actually introducing tools, and you might say unsanctioned, and they're using them, whether that might be a social media tool or a large language model to write an email or all sorts, right? Which is just becoming normal life for them. We have no control of that. We've no guardrails around that. And it's not going to be a case of don't do that because it's here already. So I think leadership is evolving. And the number one kind of thing I say to every business that I meet is my best advice, and I'm asked this a lot, whether I'm at a conference or often the last question is, what piece of advice would you give to the leaders in the room? And I would say, get together as your leadership team. If it's an SME, it might be the owner, the general manager, or the senior leadership group, and make sure that everybody's aware that AI is here, and then decide what are we going to do about it. Let's put together our AI policy. And there are great resources online. Thinking about the industry that I came from, the Irish Hotels Federation, you could Google right now, they have a sample AI policy which you can download and adapt to your specific situation. IBEC, which is the business group, also have sample AI policies online if you're a member there. And you can start small because, as we say, we update our digital handbooks all of the time. But it's time now to say, look, this is our leadership team are on the same page here. This is what we're recognizing. And maybe these are some of the bottlenecks where AI could help us. But what is our policy around usage? Let's get a policy together. Let's get one in place and let's build on that over time. And how do you get to that point? There's going to need to be further conversations once leadership have met to go back to their departments or their areas and start to conversate with their team members. Sales and marketing department, are you using tools? What tools might you be using? Front office, are you using tools? What tools might you be using? And then sanction certain tools if it's safe and safe usage, and say, actually, we don't sanction these other tools while we do further testing. And the importance of all of this as well for SMEs, because one very good thing for SMEs is that a lot of the apps and programs that they are already using for a number of years and paying a monthly subscription for are integrating AI technologies and, kind of benefits with their programs, which your team can experiment with in a safe way. And now you begin using that AI and it's working for you. And this is great. So now you're on your AI journey. Fantastic. You're not one of those SMEs that hasn't started. You're using AI. But in order for that to be safe, I think organizations have to say, okay, while we're using it, these are the guardrails. Great that we're adopting AI, but these are the guardrails. And for so many SMEs in particular, like 9 out of 10 to have no policy or guardrails at the moment, I just think, as you mentioned, they're not quite aware of the risk with that.
Yeah, staggering. And you gave us a couple of examples earlier of the risks that can be there. And I know you've spoken and you're sort of touching on building what I would describe as these adaptive AI ready teams. But we need then, don't we, for practical steps to come from the leaders, the managers of the business, the owners, because ultimately you've got to create that culture that embraces AI, but also does it from a safe, perspective. And of course, there are regulatory concerns there. So, are there any practical steps that you talk through, Patrick, when you're trying to address these fears or misconceptions, but also to help develop that culture and embracing the technology to do better business ultimately?
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, thinking back to my experience, probably one of the best things that ever happened to me was through this university. Actually, I was sent on a work placement for almost 2 years in the US many years ago when I was doing my original degree. And I worked in a large independent hotel in the US, huge property, lots of departments, hundreds of employees. But what struck me as a 20-year-old working out there was, wow, all of the employees behave in a manner that it promotes the hotel. They're on board with the hotel. They're loyal to the hotel. They follow the kind of the leadership example. And I thought, wow, there's an excellent culture here. And there's clearly excellent behavioral management here. So much so that I ended up coming back to finish my degree and doing a whole thesis on behavioral management because I was so struck at how this hotel in the US seemed to get it from a cultural and management perspective. And it was borne out in its performance and its results. So following on from that, I understand that we can have a real impact on culture. Now, in that particular business, what they were very strong on was HR. They had a very, very strong HR department with a couple of different layers. They had a HR manager, assistant manager, supervisor, very strong on training programs. I was an intern at the time, and I was systematically moved between departments every 2 months, no questions asked. And then I found when I came back to Ireland and I went through similar programs, they mightn't move you on and the program mightn't be as structured and you mightn't get the feedback, where in the US they were down the line with all of this. And I thought, wow, this all fits together. So it is possible to kind of promote that type of culture that, brings clarity to the table, open communication. And I think the way we got to communicate with our teams is any AI that we introduce, guys, will be initially on a pilot phase for 12 weeks. There will be a feedback loop where you can provide feedback on it. We will close that loop, which is very important, and we don't often do well. Okay, we get the feedback, we do nothing with it. No, we close the feedback loop. And then after 12 weeks, having analyzed this, we'll decide, are we continuing with this AI project? That could be anything from as simple as a chatbot right up to some kind of augmented process. But AI, the communication should be that it's here to assist and not replace. It's here to augment roles. It's here to create efficiencies. And I think that's going to be so important for SMEs because they're under extreme pressure in this country. 15% of business closures in Ireland in 2024 were in the hospitality SME bracket. And SMEs are only looking for ways of reducing costs and creating efficiencies. And we'll have to bring our teams with us on that. So, from a cultural point of view, I think open communication is so important. Clarity is so important. Transparency with your team. You take the example of that tool chatbot just dropped into an organization, the negative repercussions of that. It could have been much more positive potentially if we communicated first beforehand. And also, I think the key thing for leadership is to be able to say to your teams, this isn't foolproof. The AI can hallucinate, it can make mistakes. It may be right at the moment 4 out of 5 times. We shouldn't rely on the first answer that the AI gives us. Ask a second question, because the other issue I see in a lot of SMEs is a lot of even senior leadership might try it and not get the result they want immediately and then park it. Whereas it's not a search engine. It's best used as a conversational tool, right? To assist you and get to the answer that you're looking for. So those are steps I take. And finally, from a very practical step, we mentioned our SMEs have apps and tools and programs they're paying for every month, whether that's Microsoft Word and the Office suite, or in hospitality, we have a program called Revinate, which manages the guest journey from reservation to all of the amenities they use to leaving a review at the end. We need to list all of our programs and then audit them to see what AI integrations are they adding. I'm actually already paying for this. So let's see if I can get the AI benefit out of it. So I'm working with businesses now and the Chamber of Commerce, which I'm involved with on a voluntary basis, to say, right, let's list all our tools. Did you know these all have little AI integrations and we can actually marry these together through these integrations? And it's groundbreaking.
100%, yeah, 100%. And just going back to your, I suppose your career roots, these sort of deep hospitality roots, because I know you've been a general manager many times at some very well-known brands internationally, some very well, managing director of international sort of recognized hospitality groups, hotels, and you've really been operating at a senior level there with really great brands. And that must shape your approach to innovation because there's a lot of change in the hospitality world, I'm sure. Do you see that as something that's helped you and directed you? Because AI seems to touch every business, not just hospitality. But was that a benefit coming from the hospitality sector at the senior level that you're at, Patrick?
Yeah, 100%. I think the hospitality sector was fantastic for me in that, going to the US at an early age, the land of opportunity that they say, and it seemed that the kind of the harder you worked, the more opportunity opened up. And you're in a constant flux of change. You know, you're in a business that's open 24/7, 7 days a week, challenges various departments, morning, afternoon, evening. You touch everything in hospitality. You know, people might think of hospitality, hotel management is service, and yeah, it's all of that. But if you think about it, you're touching commerce, HR, finance, front office, obviously the service elements, public relations, media, you name it, as a discipline, we have to manage it in that space. And especially in those multinational groups. And I was I was a general manager of a ski resort hotel in Canada. It was Sutton Place Hotel at Revelstoke Mountain Resort. It's actually the longest vertical ski slope in North America. And all of these experiences broaden your horizons for how they deal with people, how they deal with customers and clients, and how they manage their business. And for me, also I mentioned coming through kind of the last recession and there being huge change all of the time. The number one thing that I learned was you can't direct change by just issuing a direction. It doesn't work like that. You have to be part of the change and the change has to be felt. So employees, team members need to be part of that change if it's going to work or succeed at all. And the negative consequences of change when we don't realize that can be profound for businesses that, are fine margins and rely on performance and rely on seasonality. And I would say the exact same thing for this AI adoption space. Like when we wanted to make a change in a Michelin star restaurant, you wouldn't believe the steps we had to take because it had to be perfect. Even breakfast service in a hotel like that, we're recording the time that the guest enters the dining room to when they sit, to the time they order their tea and coffee, to the time the toast hits the table, to the time they receive their hot breakfast, to the time they depart, because it has to be perfect. If that's breakfast, you can imagine what dinner service is like when you're dealing with 1 and 2 Michelin stars. So bringing that level of detail when we're talking about change management from a leadership perspective is only going to benefit us. Like the easiest example I can give you is when I stepped into these hotels as general manager or managing director, naturally, and I think it's natural human behavior, the teams and the employees in those organizations look to you. You walk through the door and they go, okay, lead, direct. It's expected of you, and they're waiting to take that direction. And I would say AI is exactly the same because they see you as the guy or girl who is responsible for this change and they want to see what you're doing about it. And I think what I learned over the years is employees are always watching, and maybe it's subconscious as well at times. They're watching behavioral cues, they're watching how management behave about certain things, what we accept, what we don't accept. And I think right now we're not sending a good signal. Management are not concerned about this. They're not thinking about it. They're not giving time to it. I remember listening to very recently um, a radio interview on one of the prominent radio stations. And there was a CEO of a large hospitality organization giving an interview. And he was asked about costs and revenue and all sorts of challenges, energy prices. And he rattled off fantastic information on all of those. And you thought this individual really knows their business. As the interview wound down, he was asked about AI and he didn't know where to go with that. And I think that's what's got to change is that we as leaders need to become informed about this space and take control of it. Because, like you said, it's here and it's in our business. And it's going to become a management discipline just like any other and a management competence, if you know what I mean.
No, I totally agree. And I just want to give a short plug as well to one of our earlier episodes, because as you were talking there, and we were talking about, these sort of large hospitality brands and how leadership needs to change. It was interesting. We had a lady called Kate Irwin. She's from Skift, who you may be familiar with as a brand. And they're sort of very prolific in the travel and hospitality business. They're very well known around the world. And it was interesting to get her take on hospitality, travel, tourism, pre-pandemic, pandemic, and then, post-pandemic, and everything that the hospitality sector's gone through has been probably experienced more change than most sectors, I think. So it's interesting. And you use the word responsible as well, Patrick, and I want to come back to that word because responsible adoption of technology is ultimately what people should be trying to strive for, I think. And I know you look at this because I'm interested in what responsible in the context of AI means to somebody like yourself. Like, is there a way that organizations can ensure everything from ethical considerations that they're sort of put front and center of the discussion? And I'm thinking about this in the context of the different industries that you talk to today, your PhD, of course, and your hospitality background, because you're attracting customers from around the world. You know, you've got international, multilingual guests, etc. But it comes down to this word responsible technology adoption, or that phrase responsible technology adoption. Any thoughts about the context of that as we move forward, Patrick?
Sure. When I speak to businesses, what I try to do is make sure that they can relate to it because going back to SMEs again, they think differently to multinationals. What might work for these large organizations may not work for the SME. And I think for SMEs to be successful in this space, it's got to marry with or work in step with what you're already doing. One SME I met recently has a section of their website called Corporate Social Responsibility, otherwise known as CSR. And on that section of the website, they speak about some of the sustainability measures that they take as a business with regards to waste and water and energy, some of the charities they support this year and last year, and that kind of thing. And I think now is the time for organizations to start thinking about how they're updating their website because what's coming down the track is the whole environmental piece, how much it costs to send a prompt into ChatGPT and what's the energy used there. It's going to a database and coming back and, what's our feeling on this as a business? How do we feel about this from a sustainability point of view? And if we're an organization whose unique selling point is the sustainability piece, we better be certain that our employees and ourselves know how to answer this question if our clients, our customers want to know, well, okay, I know what you're doing for sustainability here. What about the AI space? So we're getting to that point where that's becoming essential. And I think it comes back again to kind of our policy and procedures, but what are our values as an organization? And then let's look through the kind of funnel of our values as we start to incorporate AI so that they marry and they match. And let's make sure we don't forget about that as we make key decisions in this area. We've seen some of the mistakes that happen when we don't do that, like the example we gave of, creating a disciplinary letter through a large language model. Ethically, how do we feel about that? And was someone's details shared now? And what does that do to GDPR? And this GDPR space is huge. We've gone through this a couple of years ago when all the GDPR laws were introduced and then developed, and we have all of this compliance now. The best thing I think SMEs can do is on the back of all of that GDPR work, let's think of AI in the same frame of mind as a protective measure. The example I give to SMEs all the time is we always have wet floor signs all over our SME. It might not prevent a fall, but we've put it out there and we've done everything we can to prevent someone from slipping where we've just spilled water a little bit earlier. If we don't have the wet floor sign, we could have several people fall today and get ourselves in a lot of trouble. So we've got to decide for ourselves how AI is being used, how we're comfortable with it being used, how our competitors are using it, and know that if we don't have guardrails, we're at risk, not alone from regulatory risk, but like you say, from ethical risk and so on and so forth. And then finally, the whole sustainability piece of we say we're a sustainable business, but we've got shadow AI usage and we use AI in all these different ways. Does it marry one with the other? And that's where you start to develop a strategy.
Yeah, yeah, it's good because the word responsible, I suppose, is quite broad when you start to think about it in terms of the technology, the ethics, the sustainability, as you mentioned. And at the time of recording this episode, there was a recent, I think it's the Commission of, what is it, the Regulation of Utilities, I think is the body, and they published a new report that said all data centers, the sort of the infrastructure that AI is running on, will have to produce 80% of all their energy from renewable sources. I mean, that's a huge change. And I think there's something like a 6 year, what they're calling like a glide path, 6 years to sort of get there. But it is huge, and it's impacting us in lots of responsible ways, I suppose. And look, you mentioned you're continuing to engage with lots of businesses and universities on things like leadership and strategy and innovation where this topic's concerned. Are there any patterns that you're seeing, Patrick, in how organizations are now starting to rethink their operations in light of all this AI changes, in light of all this digital disruption that we're experiencing?
Yeah, sure. A lot of the research that I'm looking at the moment is pointing to success and saying that those businesses that are not necessarily just plugging an AI tool on top of their operation, um, it's actually the ones that are recognizing and changing their workflow to incorporate AI. So not just using it as a plugin, but actually changing the workflow itself. And I think what that's doing is a couple of things. It's awareness that AI is here and it's involved in our operation and becoming key to our operation, and identifying that it's now part of what we do on a day-to-day basis. So those organizations that are recognizing that this is actually a workflow change rather than a plugin are the ones that are probably seeing a lot of success. I met one particular business over the summer months. This person has their own brand and they're using Sintra bots now, where one of the bots checks compliance, one of the bots generates social media posts, another bot does something else, whether it's email generation or invoice generation. And she's changed her entire workflow. And it's not a case that she just plugged this in, because if she just plugged it in, she would still be doing all of the manual work by checking it all of the time, not integrating it, using them in isolation or in silos. No, these bots actually are connected. They do this work for her. The human in the loop is very important, where she checks it all of the time for its outputs. But she said it massively reduces her time because she's not spending all of her evenings now going through all of her administration, trying to come up with her own unique social media posts, trying to ensure that she's compliant and all of that. So it's those businesses that are making it part of their workflow that are saying, yeah, this is really working for me. It's the businesses that tried to plug it in. And let's say our example of the organization that tried to put the chatbot in, and they're saying, oh, this didn't work, and they're sidelining it. And this statistic is more related to automation and large industry, but you see in the US that they're reporting 95% AI failure rates. Like every time AI is introduced as a pilot, it's failing at a rate of 95%. But I don't think that's the tech. I think that's probably part of it, but I think it's how we're trying to do it. And again, not fully understanding. And I think that's why in the US at the moment, there are a number of great speakers and consultants who are gaining huge traction because they're speaking about the behavioral and organizational side of this rather than the practical, or the technical, because they're saying it's not just about the technical anymore.
I think it's a great point, and I think those it's no longer okay just to say, well, look, we'll just plug it in, we'll just use it. It's a workflow, it's a change of organizational structure, it's possibly reskilling and re-education of the workforce, and it's embracing a different, I suppose, way of operating. It's more agile, it's more nimble, it can save a lot of time. And it's a great point that you make because it's not a magic, magic answer. You can't just wave a wand and everything's okay. And again, I'm going to come back to the human aspect is so critical to getting AI right. But look, before we wrap up and run out of time, Patrick, I'm going to ask a bit of a catch-all question because I want to leave our audience with a few takeaways. And I'm going to ask you that as you look ahead from your research and from your vantage point now, what are the trends? What are the shifts that you think will define the next 3, 4, 5 years in this intersection of leadership, AI, organizational transformation, that sort of cross section that we've been sort of talking around today? What are the trends and the shifts, and what's going to define us over the next number of years from your perspective, Patrick?
Sure, thank you. I think the technology will continue to develop at an exciting rate, but I think the story will be around organizational maturity. I think SMEs are catching up a little bit on the technical aspects that work for them because of experimentation and tools and that kind of thing. And they'll find their way with that. But I think the organizations over the next 5 years that will see success with this is the ones that are communicating effectively with their teams, whose teams are with them on the journey. And I understand that's not always easy if roles do change. But again, SMEs need to manage that process of role change and new role introduction better, and it's not something maybe that would have been seen as a strength of many SMEs previously because they may not have the resources of the large multinationals. And I remember when I did a thesis way back when, I found that in the US they had very strong HR, and in Ireland at the time, because we were heading into the recession, many businesses went without HR. They thought that this was something that they didn't need as a cost because they were under pressure, right? And there were negative consequences out of that. So I think the ones who do the communication and clarity piece best, where the team understand that this is here to augment and assist, will be the ones that do very well. And I think you'll see organizations catch up on that kind of maturity to go, this is actually a management competence. I can no longer do a radio interview and know everything about all of the old school matters and not be able to speak genuinely and consistently and effectively on AI for a good period of time to demonstrate that I know what I'm doing here. It's those organizations who take AI just as seriously as all the other plates that they're spinning, let's say. And I know what that's like as an MD and a GM, you're spinning multiple plates. The benefits are huge because, quick example, working in hospitality in Canada, we would always look at room rate. We got 399 for that room. Could we have got 499? Where are all the little missed opportunities? We just check our competitors on booking.com, see what they're charging and push our rate up. Well, actually, AI is going to do all of this for us now. So all of those $100 or whatever that we're missing, we can get all of that back. And for fine margin businesses, that's huge. And again, for SMEs that might be overwhelmed, start small. Have your leadership conversation, audit the tools that you already have, experiment, ensure you have even very straightforward guardrails which you can develop, and you grow in your AI journey over time. And it's those businesses that give it that attention and focus that will do best, I think.
Well, that's some great points to leave our audience with. And that brings us, unfortunately, to the end of our show today with Patrick Shields. I want to make sure and ask our audience to tune in again to see and listen to the next VistaTalks show, where once again we'll be discussing some more interesting topics with interesting people from all around the world, just like Patrick. But Patrick, thanks very much for your insights. Thanks for being a guest on the show today. It's been a pleasure to talk to you again.
Thank you, Simon.